Welcome back, Crossroads kids. I'm so glad that you have joined us again. Today is our second video in our pet series. Last week we learned all about dogs, and I'm super excited that you guys have decided to come back because today we're going to be learning about cats. We learned last week that dogs are wonderful companions. They're loyal, they're faithful, they're wherever you are, and they want to be with you all the time. They follow you around, they listen, they obey, they do fun tricks, they play, they fetch balls. Dogs are great because whatever you want to do, they want to do it too. And we learned that that's how we should be loyal to Jesus, just like a dog. However, then there are cats. Cats are very different from dogs in lots of ways. Probably the biggest difference is just their attitude. Cats are much more independent than their canine counterparts. Sure, cats might come when they're called, but only if they feel like it. They'll hop up in your lap, but only if they're in the mood. A cat won't do what you ask, and they won't stop doing something that you tell them to stop unless they want to. Sure, you can chase a cat away, but what happens when you step away? That cat goes right back where it was, and it's not going to let you stop it. Cats are stubborn, and that can be frustrating. It can be frustrating when people are stubborn and strong-willed too. No one likes it when somebody stubbornly refuses to do what they've been asked to do. I bet some of your parents might know a little bit about that. But we're going to find out from actually some special guests that we have who are going to join us here in just a minute why it might matter that we need to look at cats and learn a little bit from them. So I have special guests today. Our guests are Oliver and Bella, and they are going to have a little conversation that we're going to get to listen into. So let's listen in.
How you doing there, Bella? Not bad. How's things with you? Pretty good. The seafood place must have had a bunch of kids tonight. Lots of shrimp in the dumpster. I love shrimp. I tell you, it's a regular feast. Better get over there before the possums crawl in. I'm surprised you were able to take advantage. Isn't this the time of night you usually claw at the screen of your master's house? Not anymore, Bella. My master went out and got one of them litter boxes. A litter box? Yeah, set it right in the house next to the side-by-side washer and dryer. They brought me in, gave me food and water. It was nice. So what did you do? What do you think I did? I went to the door and pawed at it until somebody let me out. Good for you. Crazy humans. Think they can tell me what to do? You gotta show them who's boss. I tell you, it drives me nuts when my people treat me like some dog. I'm not gonna fetch. I'm not gonna come when you call me, and I'm definitely not wearing that stupid Christmas sweater. How's things with your master? Oh, she's okay, I guess. I'm a little disappointed in her, though. The other day, she's got friends over, and they start going on about how nobody believes in God anymore. Doesn't your master believe in God? She says she does. But when people start flapping their gums, she doesn't say anything. She just sits there, silent. Boy, he's a wimp. I'm like, come on, girl. When have you ever seen me back down in the face of a challenge? Do I get scared of dogs? Do I come and let you pet me just because you want to and you have a treat? No, I'm a cat. I do what I want when I want. You're a Christian. And Christians gotta stand firm in their faith. They can't let others tell them what to believe. So, anyway, the seafood place is good tonight, huh? King prawns, Bella. Can't beat it. Sounds good. Think I'll swing by there. You wanna come? No thanks. Mrs. Culpepper lets her dog out on the leash in 10 minutes, and I want to be there, sitting 3 feet beyond his reach. Oh, all right. See you later, Oliver. So long, Bella.
Well, Oliver and Bella certainly helped us to understand that maybe it's okay for us to be like cats. Being stubborn isn't always a bad thing when it comes to our faith. Sometimes Christians have to make the choice to be stubborn. When people challenge our faith, like Bella's owner's friends challenged her faith, we can choose to bend or compromise, or we can choose to stand strong. Standing strong isn't usually the easy choice, but we're going to look at a story today where they stood up for God. and realize that we never have to stand alone. That's going to be our point today. We need to be brave and stand up for God. Let's see what this scripture tells us all about that. We're going to be in the book of Daniel, chapter 3 today. And I'm going to summarize the part that's happened already. Daniel was a young Jewish man, and he and his family and friends were actually living in a country that they weren't supposed to be in because they had gotten captured. They were living in a place called Babylon. Now, there was a king in Babylon, and he did not love God like Daniel and his friends did. This king had made a crazy big statue. It was so big. Had made a big statue, and he told all the people in the land that whenever they heard music, they had to stop whatever they were doing, bow down, and worship the statue. Now, Daniel and his friends knew that this wasn't the right thing to do. They knew that worship should only be to God, not to a statue, even if the king said that that's what they were supposed to do. So, Daniel had 3 friends, and we'll hear more about them in just a minute. I want to read to you from the book of Daniel, chapter 3. Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, had just decided that they were not going to listen to what the king told them to do. They were going to stand strong in their faith, but that did not make the king happy. Starting in chapter 3, verse 13, it says, "Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, 'Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power?'" Man, Nebuchadnezzar thought that he was a pretty big deal. He told them that if they didn't listen and do what he told them to do and bow down and worship this fake God, then he was going to throw them into a fire. I bet they were scared. I would have been. But listen to what they said. Now I'm in verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve you or your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up." They stood up for God. They were brave. They had a very, very strong will to stand up for what was right. And that made Nebuchadnezzar really, really mad. Let's see what he does next. Verse 19 says, Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. Can you make a face where you're distorted with rage? Oh, good job. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. And he ordered some of the strongest men in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king, in his anger, had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. It is not looking good for our friends, guys. They've been thrown into this furnace that was so hot that it actually killed the guys that were throwing them in there. I mean, how can they survive something like that? We'll have to see. Verse 24 says, "But suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, 'Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?' 'Yes, your majesty, we certainly did,' they replied. 'Look,' Nebuchadnezzar shouted, 'I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god.' Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, 'Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here.' So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell like smoke. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be burned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this." Wow. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had to have crazy strong faith. We talked about how cats are strong-willed creatures, stubborn and bold in the face of things that come against them. But cats have nothing on these three young men in this story. They had a choice to either stand up for what they believed in or die in a terrible fire. Knowing that they would likely die, the boys banded together and they stood up for what was right. They trusted their lives to God. Nebuchadnezzar thought that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were fools to disobey him. But it was Nebuchadnezzar who looked like a fool when he threw them into the fiery furnace, because he looked inside and saw that not 3, but 4 men were walking around. The king knew then that he was wrong, and he made amends with the 3 brave Israelites. Standing up for God can be really, really scary, and sometimes it can be really costly too. But God wants us to stand strong so that he can use us to show other people that our faith and our God are super real. I'd love to tell you that the world we live in is open and accepting of your faith, but that's just simply not true. We live in a broken world with lots of messed up stuff, and in that world there are lots of people who don't believe in God like we do. They don't want to believe there's a God who has spoken and said that things are right and wrong, and they don't want to believe in Jesus. They don't want anyone to tell them that they're wrong. It can be really scary sometimes for us being a Christian when maybe people around us aren't. And it can be hard to resist the pressure from our friends that comes when we're around others who don't share our faith. People will tell you to ignore the Bible and to just do whatever you want, whatever feels good. They'll tell you that it's no big deal and that no one will ever know. But we know that that's not true. God is always watching us, and he gave us the Bible to tell us what was right and what was wrong. But he can also give us the courage to take a stand for him when we need to. God can also use us to show his truth to other people. When we show the world that we're not afraid, we show them that there's something greater than us, something that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were willing to die for. God can make us a witness when we are brave enough to stand for him. And he can use us to open other people's hearts to Jesus, which is so awesome. It's never easy to stand against the world, but unlike stubborn cats, we never have to stand alone. God is always with us, and he always stands with us when we stand for him. You never know when your faith is going to be challenged, guys. But we can be sure that when it is, God will be there to give us the courage to stand strong. Thanks so much for joining me today, guys. I hope you've learned all about how we have to be brave and stand up for God. I hope that you'll join me in our next video, and we're going to talk about another animal then, and I'm super excited for you to join me. Until then, I hope you guys have a chance to discuss this video with the people you're watching it with using the questions that are going to come up on the screen. All right, guys, I hope you talked about all of those awesome questions with your family or friends or whoever you're watching this with. Join me again in just a few days and we'll learn more about what pets can teach us about how we should live our lives for God. Thanks so much for joining me, and don't forget to be like a cat and stand strong for God. Bye, guys.